The sky above the planet Vera was a strange mix of deep purple and fiery orange. Two suns burned fiercely, casting long shadows across the jagged mountain cliffs and barren deserts. But beneath the beauty of the alien skies, chaos ruled. The great empire that controlled Vera had been growing crueler by the day, crushing any sign of rebellion without mercy. Yet in the heart of this oppression, a single spark of hope remained, a rebel princess whose courage inspired her people to fight for freedom. Princess Lyra was unlike any ruler the galaxy had seen before. Born into a world of strict rules and cold politics, she had never accepted the cruel ways of her family's empire. Her heart beat for the weak, the forgotten, and the lost. When the Empire's soldiers attacked a rebel camp deep in the desert, she led her warriors fearlessly, refusing to surrender or hide. But even the bravest can be wounded, and fate dealt her a harsh blow. An enemy blast tore through the air, catching her by surprise. She fell hard onto the sand, pain shooting through her side like fire. Her vision blurred, and she heard the shouts of her soldiers around her, some calling for help, others urging a retreat. The desert winds whipped fiercely, carrying dust and the harsh cries of battle. Lyra tried to rise, but her strength failed her. Blood soaked her clothes, and the pain in her ribs grew unbearable. The Empire's soldiers were closing in fast. They wanted to capture her alive or kill her before she could inspire more resistance. Her guards fought desperately to protect her, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one they fell, leaving the princess alone and vulnerable. As the enemy troops advanced, Lyra knew she had only moments left. She gritted her teeth and prepared for the worst. But in the distance, a strange figure appeared, a human. Humans were rare and mysterious on Vera. They came from a blue planet called Earth, far across the stars, and they were often caught in the crossfire of alien wars. This human was different. He wasn't a soldier, nor a mercenary. He looked confused, scared even, but his eyes burned with determination. Somehow, this stranger had stumbled upon the battlefield at the worst possible moment, or perhaps the best. The human rushed forward without hesitation, dodging blasts and fallen, warriors alike. With no weapons except his bare hands, he pushed past the soldiers closing in on Lyra. In a desperate act, he threw himself between the princess and her attackers. His presence shocked the enemy. They hesitated for just a second, long enough for Lyra to crawl toward safety. She barely believed what was happening. This human, a complete stranger, was risking his life for her, a wounded alien princess. She wanted to thank him, to ask why, but her breath was shallow, and her strength slipping away. The human lifted her carefully, ignoring the pain she winced at, and carried her toward a narrow canyon where they could hide. Inside the rocky shadows of the canyon, the noise of battle faded. The human gently laid Lyra down on soft sand and looked at her wounds. His hands were trembling, but he tried to stay calm. He had no idea how to help an alien princess, or how to fight the Empire's soldiers who were surely hunting them. He knew one thing. Clearly he couldn't leave her. To die. Lyra's mind raced as she watched the human struggle with fear and determination. Who was he? Why had he come to this distant world? Could she trust him? And more importantly, would he be strong enough to keep her alive in the days to come? Her body ached, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had been wounded, yes, but her fight was far from over. And this human, maybe, just maybe, he was the unlikely champion her people needed. The human's name was Jake. He had arrived on Vera by accident, caught in a strange storm while exploring a distant star system. He had no idea of the political wars, the empires, or the rebel princesses. At first, he just wanted to survive and find a way back home. But seeing Lyra wounded and helpless changed everything. Jake had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, not a hero. He worked as an engineer back on Earth, fixing machines and dreaming of adventure. But here, in the alien desert, with danger all around, he had to become something more. Protecting Lyra meant risking everything, his life, his future even, his beliefs. But as he cleaned and dressed her wounds with whatever supplies he could find, he felt something stirring inside him, a strange courage he never knew he had. Lyra, for her part, was struggling to trust this human. His touch was rough, but careful, and his eyes showed genuine concern. Still, her instincts warned her that trust was dangerous in this world. Allies could become enemies in a heartbeat. One mistake could cost them both their lives. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The two hid in the canyon's shadow, with only the stars and distant howls of alien creatures for company. Jake kept watch, alert to every sound. Lyra's breathing was shallow, but she refused to give in to weakness. She forced herself to speak, to keep Jake focused. "We don't have much time," she whispered. "The Empire's soldiers will come looking for me at dawn. If they find us here, I won't survive." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we need a plan. I don't know much about your world or your enemies, but I'm not going to let them take you." Despite her pain, Lyra smiled faintly. It was the first sign of hope she had felt in days. She began to tell Jake about her people, the rebels fighting to free their planet from tyranny, the Empire's cruelty, and the heavy burden she carried as their princess. Every word painted a picture of danger and courage, of a war that had no end in sight. Jake listened closely, his mind racing. He wasn't sure how he would fit into this story, but he knew one thing: he was no longer just a visitor. He was part of the fight now. The next morning came too soon. The harsh sunlight pierced the canyon, and the distant sounds of soldiers echoed like thunder. Jake helped Lyra to her feet, supporting her weak body. They had to move fast. The Empire's forces were searching, and the canyon offered only temporary safety. Together, they began a slow, painful journey through the rocky terrain. Every step was a struggle for Lyra, but Jake refused to leave her behind. They hid in caves, avoided patrols, and crossed dangerous paths. The desert was full of hidden dangers, poisonous creatures, shifting sands, and deadly storms. But the greatest threat was the Empire's relentless pursuit. As they traveled, Lyra and Jake grew closer. The princess saw in Jake a strength not just of body, but of spirit. The human was learning quickly, adapting to alien weapons and tactics. He asked questions, remembered details, and even began to plan their next moves. Jake, in turn, saw Lyra not as a distant alien royal, but as a fierce, brave woman fighting for something greater than herself. One night, under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, Lyra told Jake about the ancient legends of her people's stories, of warriors who rose against impossible odds, of heroes who carried the light of hope through darkness. She said that maybe, together, they could become part of that legend. Jake looked at her, tired but determined. "Then let's make sure your story doesn't end here." But the Empire was closing in. Unbeknownst to Jake and Lyra, an elite squad of hunters tracked their every move. These soldiers were the Empire's deadliest, trained to capture high-value targets alive. Their commander was ruthless and had orders to bring the princess back, no matter the cost. One evening, as the two rested near a hidden oasis, their camp was discovered. Blazing lasers cut through the night, and explosions shattered the silence. Jake grabbed a crude weapon from their supplies and stood protectively in front of Lyra, ready to fight for the first time. The battle was fierce, but brief. They managed to escape, but Lyra's wound reopened, and her strength failed again. Jake's heart pounded with fear, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to be her champion no matter what. Days passed like this: pain, danger, escape. In brief moments of hope, Lyra's condition worsened, but her spirit remained unbroken. Jake grew stronger, smarter, and braver. They were no longer just a princess and a lost human. They were partners in a desperate fight for survival. One evening, as they watched the twin suns set over the desert horizon, Lyra looked at Jake with tired eyes. "You've saved me more times than I can count. I don't know how to repay you." Jake smiled softly. "Just keep fighting. That's all I need." But deep inside, both of them knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would not give up so easily, and their journey was far from over. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a war raged on, and a human champion had just stepped into the storm. The desert winds had barely settled when Jake realized the true weight of the choice he had made. Protecting Princess Lyra wasn't just about carrying an injured stranger anymore. It was about standing against a powerful empire that crushed anyone who dared to rise against it. The heat of Vera's twin sons burned down fiercely, but Jake's resolve burned even stronger. Every moment with Lyra deepened his understanding of the harsh world she came from, and the fight she had to lead. Lyra lay resting beneath the cracked stones of a hidden cave, but her breathing was shallow and uneven. The wound in her side still burned sharply, reminding Jake that time was not on their side. He looked down at her, her pale face touched by the glow of alien moons outside the cave's mouth. She was a symbol of hope for her people, but right now she was fragile. Jake's heart twisted with a mix of fear and determination. If she died here, everything they fought for would be lost, but there was no time to waste on sorrow. Jake helped. Lyra sat up, supporting her as they planned their next move. They had to find allies, others who believed in the rebellion, who would stand with them against the Empire. But in this vast and dangerous desert, allies were few and enemies many. Jake's mind raced as he recalled the stories Lyra had told. Hymn of rebel camps scattered across the wastelands, secret messages passed in whispers, and a network of fighters hiding in the shadows. Their journey would be perilous. The Empire's hunters were relentless, and the desert itself was unforgiving. But Jake, who once only dreamed of adventure, now embraced it with every fiber of his being. For Lyra, he would become more than a protector. He would become a warrior. As they moved under the cover of night, Lyra explained the rules of the rebellion. The Empire ruled through fear, controlling planets with an iron fist and crushing any spark of resistance. The rebels were outgunned and outnumbered, forced to rely on cunning, loyalty, and hope. Lyra's injury had left the rebellion vulnerable, and her capture would have been a devastating blow. Jake listened carefully. He saw the fire behind Lyra's words, a fire that refused to die even when her body was weak. She wasn't just fighting for herself or her title. She was fighting for freedom, for a future where her people could live without fear. But trust was still fragile. The rebel leaders, when Jake met them, were suspicious of the human. To them, humans were outsiders, unpredictable, weak, and possibly spies for the Empire. Jake had to prove himself. Every small task, every act of courage counted. He repaired broken equipment, learned alien fighting techniques, and endured endless training sessions under the watchful eyes of hardened rebels. Lyra watched him quietly, her respect growing with each day. She had seen countless warriors come and go, many falling to despair or betrayal. But Jake was different. His determination was raw and unpolished, but it was real. Slowly, a bond formed between them, one of mutual respect, trust, and a shared purpose. The Empire did not rest. Their elite hunters continued to search, spreading fear across the desert and tightening their grip. Reports reached the rebels of villages burned, friends captured, and traitors punished harshly. Every day was a reminder that failure was not an option. One night, as the twin moons hung low in the sky, the rebel camp was attacked. The Empire's forces struck hard and fast, aiming to capture Lyra and crush the rebellion once and for all. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Jake, armed with only a rifle and raw courage, fought alongside the rebels, surprising even the most experienced warriors with his bravery. During the battle, Lyra was taken hostage. The rebels were forced to retreat, leaving Jake behind with a small group to cover their escape. The weight of failure pressed down heavily on Jake's shoulders. The princess, the hope of an entire people, was in the hands of the Empire. His mission had become clear: rescue her, no matter the cost. The journey to the Empire's stronghold was dangerous. Jake and his small team moved silently through desert canyons and ruined cities, avoiding patrols and using every trick they had learned. They gathered intelligence, learned about the Empire's weaknesses, and prepared for the impossible. Jake's leadership began to show. He was not a trained soldier, but his determination inspired those around him. Rebels who had doubted the human began to see him as a symbol of hope. The human who had once been lost in an alien world was now becoming its champion. Meanwhile, Lyra endured harsh treatment. The Empire's commanders hoped to break her spirit using threats, isolation, and intimidation. But Lyra was stronger than they knew. Even in chains, she held her head high, refusing to give the Empire the satisfaction of her defeat. At night, in her cell, Lyra thought of Jake, the human who risked everything for her. She clung to the hope that he would come for her. That hope was a lifeline, damned. Keeping her alive when all seemed lost, the day of the rescue arrived with a sky heavy with storm clouds. Jake and his team approached the fortress, their hearts pounding. With fear and determination, they knew the odds were against them. The Empire's soldiers were well-trained and heavily armed. But they had no choice. Failure meant the end of the rebellion. Jake led the charge with quiet confidence. They fought. Through guards, dodged traps, and moved swiftly through dark corridors. Every step was a battle, every breath precious. The tension was unbearable. One mistake could mean death. Finally, they reached the prison cells. Jake's heart leaped as he spotted Lyra, bruised but alive. She looked at him with relief and fierce gratitude. Together they broke free and made a desperate dash for freedom. The Empire's alarms screamed behind them as they raced through the fortress. Soldiers poured out, firing wildly. Jake carried Lyra on his back, ignoring the pain in his arms and the burning in his lungs. The desert awaited them outside, wild, dangerous, but free. Under the stormy sky, the Empire's forces closing in, Jake and Lyra disappeared into the night fugitives. Rebels and unlikely champions of a future not yet written. The storm had passed, leaving the desert cool and silent under the twin moons of Vera. But the calm was only temporary. For Jake and Lyra, the fight was far from over. Their escape from the Empire's fortress had been narrow, and the danger now pressed on them from all sides. The Empire would not rest until they were dead or back in chains. And the rebels, who had once doubted Jake's strength, now looked to him with cautious hope. Lyra's wound had slowed their progress. But the human had become more than a protector. He was her champion in every sense. He carried her through rocky passes, shielded her from wild creatures that roamed the desert nights, and fought off scouts sent to track them. His learning curve was steep. Jake had never fired an alien weapon before, never planned a military attack, yet necessity forced him to adapt quickly. Each day he grew more confident, more skilled, and the rebels who traveled with them grew to trust him more. They had a destination, a hidden rebel base deep in the mountains. A place whispered about in secret messages and old legends. Could reach it, they might find allies strong enough to challenge the Empire. But the journey was dangerous. The desert was unforgiving. And Empire patrols scoured every trail. As they moved under the cover of darkness, Lyra and Jake shared stories. She told him of her childhood in a palace of cold stone and cruel rulers, of the moment she had chosen rebellion over comfort, and of the hope she carried for her people. Jake spoke of Earth, a blue planet full of life and dreams, far from the wars of Vera, though worlds apart. Their stories built a bridge of understanding. But peace was fragile. One morning, as the sun rose over jagged peaks, they found the remains of a rebel outpost. The site was burned and shattered, bodies left where they fell. The Empire's cruelty was clear. No one was safe, no place truly hidden. The rebels were losing ground, and time was slipping through their fingers. Jake's heart pounded with anger and fear. Lyra, despite her pain, raised her head high. "We cannot give up," she said softly. "Our people need us. We will not fail." The group pressed on, but the Empire's forces were closing in faster than they expected. A trap awaited them in a narrow canyon, ambushed by elite soldiers. Their only choice was to fight or die. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but Jake's quick thinking turned the tide. Using the rocky terrain, he set clever traps and coordinated their defense. Rebels who had once doubted him now fought fiercely by his side. After the dust settled, Lyra looked at Jake with new respect. You are no longer a stranger to this war. You've become a true warrior. But victory was bittersweet. The Empire's power was vast, and their enemies far from finished. Lyra's wound, though healing slowly, reminded them all of the stakes. Every day without safety was a risk. They needed more than courage. They needed a plan. In the rebel base hidden among the mountains, Jake and Lyra met other leaders. The room buzzed with urgency and fear. Plans were drawn and debated, alliances forged and broken. The rebels knew they could not win a straight fight with the Empire's overwhelming force. Instead, they needed to strike from the shadows. Sabotage, stealth, and cunning. Jake found himself at the center of these plans. His knowledge of Earth technology, combined with his growing understanding of alien weapons, made him a valuable asset. He worked day and night preparing devices, training fighters, and helping Lyra recover. Yet the Empire's spies were everywhere. Soon, the rebels discovered a traitor in their midst, someone feeding information to the Empire, threatening to destroy everything they had built. The betrayal stung deeply. Trust, once fragile, now felt like a dangerous gamble. Lyra, though, weakened, refused to be broken. We will find the traitor, she vowed, and we will make the Empire pay for every life they have taken. Jake agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about justice, freedom, and the future of an entire world. As they prepared for their next move, a new threat emerged. The Empire's elite commander, the one who had once captured Lyra, was hunting them with a personal vendetta. His forces grew larger and more ruthless. Every step Jake and Lyra took was shadowed by danger. But amidst the fear, hope flickered. Jake had become more than a stranger. He was a symbol of resistance. Lyra's spirit burned brighter, fueled by his courage and the rebels' unyielding fight. One night, under the twin moons, Jake looked at Lyra and promised, "We will win this war. Together." And for the first time since the fight began, Lyra smiled with real hope. The Empire's grip tightened like a noose. No place was safe for the rebels anymore. Word spread quickly that the elite commander, known as Varric, was hunting them personally. He was a ruthless man, feared for his cold mind and brutal tactics. Wherever Varric went, destruction followed. Villages burned, rebels captured, and hope crushed beneath his boots. For Lyra and Jake, the threat was more than just a danger. It was a shadow that darkened every step they took. The rebel base in the mountains became a hive of fear and suspicion. The news of a traitor among them had already shaken their fragile trust. But now the hunt for Varric's forces left no time. For rest, meetings were tense, plans hurried and whispered in secret. Lyra's wound had slowed her recovery, and Jake took more responsibility, leading patrols, scouting for enemy movement, and keeping the rebels focused. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the jagged peaks, a messenger arrived with grim news. A nearby rebel camp had been attacked and destroyed. Survivors spoke of betrayal. Someone within their ranks had revealed their location. The rebels' worst fear was true. The traitor was real, and they had no idea who it was. Paranoia spread like wildfire. Old friends eyed each other with suspicion. Every whisper sounded like a secret plan against them. Jake felt the weight of leadership press down on him. He had come to this alien world as a lost visitor. But now, with Lyra's life and the rebellion depending on him, he could not afford mistakes. Lyra, though weakened, stood firm. "Fear will destroy us faster than the Empire's weapons," she said during a council meeting. "We must find the traitor, but not lose ourselves in the process." The rebels began a secret investigation. Jake joined the effort, searching for clues, listening carefully to every conversation. It's like walking on thin ice. One wrong step, and the whole rebellion could collapse. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Messages intercepted, suspicious meetings, and a shadow moving through the ranks. But the traitor was careful, always one step ahead. Then, in a quiet moment, Jake found himself alone with Lyra. She looked at him, pain and determination in her eyes. "I trusted to Isley once," she confessed. "I will not make that mistake again." Jake nodded, feeling the bond between them deepen. They had both been wounded physically and in trust, but they would face this new danger together. Days later, the Empire launched a surprise attack on the mountain base. Varric himself led the assault. The rebels were caught off guard, forced into a desperate defense. The sounds of blaster fire and explosions filled the air. Jake fought fiercely, pushing back soldiers with everything he had learned. Still weak, stood beside him, rallying the fighters with her words and spirit. In the chaos, Jake spotted a figure sneaking through the shadows, the traitor. His heart pounded as he followed silently. The traitor was heading to the Empire's command tent, ready to deliver the rebels' secrets. Jake knew he had to stop them. A sudden confrontation erupted. Traitor turned, surprise and fear in his eyes. Jake fought with everything he had, the struggle raw and desperate. The traitor's weapon grazed Jake's arm, but the human's will was stronger. With a final push, Jake disarmed the traitor and took him prisoner. The truth was shocking. The traitor was one of Lyra's closest advisors, someone she had trusted like family. The betrayal cut deep, but exposing the spy saved the rebellion from ruin. With the traitor captured, the rebels fought back harder. The battle raged through the night. Lyra, drawing strength from Jake's courage, led a counterattack that turned the tide. Varric's forces were forced to retreat, but the victory was costly. The mountain base lay in ruins, and the rebels were scattered. Era's wound worsened, and Jake carried her to a hidden cave deep in the forest. There, under the quiet watch of ancient trees, they tended to their wounds and prepared for what lay ahead. As they rested, Jake and Lyra talked about the future, the price they had paid, the friends they had lost, and the war that still waited. "We are stronger because we fight together," Lyra said softly. "But the Empire will not stop. They want to break us completely." Jake looked into her eyes, his own full of fierce determination. "Then we will rise stronger. We'll become the champions our people need." The night was long and silent, but hope burned quietly between them. The Empire was powerful, its forces endless, but so was the fire in the hearts of those who refused to bow. And Jake, once a lost human on an alien world, had become the unexpected champion of a rebel princess and her people's desperate fight for freedom. The ruins of the mountain base were still smoking as Jake and Lyra prepared to make their stand. The Empire's forces had been pushed back, but the victory had come at a terrible cost. Rebels were scattered, supplies were low, and the Empire's shadows still stretched long over Vera's desert and mountains. Lyra's wound had slowed her recovery, but her spirit remained unbroken. She knew the coming battle would decide the fate of her people. Jake stood beside her, no longer just a stranger lost in a foreign war. He was a warrior, a leader, and her champion. The rebels looked to them both for hope, a hope that felt fragile but fierce. Their plan was desperate but clear: strike at the heart of the Empire's control. The Empire's fortress, a massive structure of cold metal and stone, was the source of the oppression. Destroying it could spark a rebellion across the planet, uniting fractured rebel groups and giving the people a chance to reclaim their freedom, but getting there would not be easy. The fortress was heavily guarded, surrounded by miles of desert, with patrols watching every path. The Empire expected an attack, and their defenses were deadly. Jake spent hours studying maps, helping Lyra and the rebel commanders plan the assault. His knowledge of Earth tactics mixed with the rebels' guerrilla warfare skills to create a new kind of strategy, one based on speed, surprise, and the clever use of the harsh environment. The rebels prepared quietly, gathering weapons, training fighters, and readying explosives. Every moment was filled with tension and hope. The night before the attack, Jake found Lyra staring at the stars, her expression distant. "You're ready for this," he said softly. "We all are." Lyra shook her head. "Ready or not, we have no choice. This is the moment we've fought for. I only hope we survive it." The attack began just before dawn, under a sky still heavy with stars. Rebels moved like shadows through the desert, silent and fast. Jake led a small strike team tasked with disabling the fortress's outer defenses. The rest of the rebels followed, ready to storm the gates once the perimeter was down. The battle erupted with the roar of explosions and blaster fire. The Empire's soldiers fought fiercely, but the rebels' surprise attack threw them into chaos. Jake moved through the fortress's walls with determination, disarming traps and fighting soldiers with a mix of alien weapons and Earth tactics. Lyra, despite her weakened state, inspired the fighters around her. Her voice rang out, calling for courage and unity. She led charges, directed the wounded to safety, and refused to let her pain stop her. Inside the fortress, the fighting grew more desperate. The Empire's commanders unleashed their deadliest weapons, but the rebels pressed forward. Jake and Lyra fought side by side, their bonds stronger than ever. At the heart of the fortress, they faced Varric, the ruthless commander who had hunted them for so long. The battle between Jake and Varric was fierce and brutal. Varric was a skilled warrior, but Jake's determination and quick thinking gave him the edge. With a final desperate move, Jake defeated Varric, ending the Empire's grip on the fortress. The victory was a turning point. The Empire's forces retreated, and rebel groups across Vera rose up in rebellion. The people began to believe that freedom was possible, but the cost was high. Many rebels had fallen, and the fortress lay in ruins. Lyra's wound had reopened during the fight, and Jake carried her away from the battlefield to safety. As they rested beneath the twin moons, Lyra looked at Jake with tired but fierce eyes. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The Empire may be broken here, but the war is far from over." Jake nodded, holding her hand tightly. "Then we fight on, together." The fortress lay in ruins, its cold metal walls twisted and broken under the force of the rebels' assault. The sky above Vera was heavy with smoke, but also filled with the faint glow of dawn, a new beginning. For Lyra and Jake, the battle had changed everything. The Empire's grip was shattered, but the war was far from over. The rebels had won a great victory, but it came with a heavy price. The desert and mountains were scarred, many of their friends were lost, and the Empire's wrath would only grow. Stronger, Lyra's wound, reopened during the final battle, had left her weak and in pain. Jake stayed by her side, a silent guardian, his eyes filled with fierce determination. The rebel leaders gathered in the hidden mountain base, their faces tired but hopeful. Plans were made to rebuild, to unite the scattered rebel groups, and to protect the people who had suffered under the Empire's rule for too long. Lyra, though weakened, was still their heart, their princess and their symbol of freedom. Jake listened as Lyra spoke to the council, her voice steady despite her pain. "We have shown the Empire that we will not bow, but they will strike back harder. We must prepare for the coming storm. Our fight is not just for Vera, it is for every world the Empire oppresses." The human's role had grown beyond what he had ever imagined. No longer just a protector or a warrior, Jake had become a leader, a symbol of hope for two worlds. The rebels saw in him a strength and courage that bridged the gap between alien and human, between past and future. As days passed, rumors spread. Across Vera of the Empire's new weapon, a terrible force designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. The rebels had little information, only whispers of a power unlike any they had faced before. Fear gripped many hearts, but Lyra and Jake refused to give in. They began to prepare. New alliances were forged with other planets oppressed by the Empire. Technology from Earth mixed with alien science, creating weapons and defenses stronger than ever. Jake led training missions, pushing the rebels to be ready for the battles ahead. But the Empire was not finished. One night, under the twin moons, a shadow fell across the rebel base. Scouts returned with news. A massive fleet was approaching Vera's skies, ready to crush the rebellion once and for all. The final battle was coming. Jake and Lyra stood together, looking out over the dark desert. The wind whispered through the rocky canyons, carrying the scent of dust and fire. Lyra's hand found Jake's, their fingers intertwined. Neither spoke, but their eyes said everything: fear, hope, and an unbreakable bond. as the first ships appeared on the horizon, blazing with the Empire's deadly weapons. The rebels prepared to fight for their future. It was a fight not just for freedom, but for the right to live without fear. The battle was brutal and unrelenting. Lasers cut through the night, explosions shook the ground, and heroes rose and fell. Jake fought with every ounce of strength, protecting Lyra and the rebels. Lyra, despite her pain, inspired the fighters with her courage and vision. When the dust settled, the Empire's fleet was broken. The rebels had won, but at a great cost. The desert was silent once more, save for the quiet breaths of survivors and the distant stars above in the aftermath. Lyra and Jake stood on a cliff overlooking the desert. The twin suns were rising, painting the sky with colors of hope and renewal. "We have won," Lyra said softly. "But this is only the beginning of a new journey." Jake smiled, his heart full. "Together, we will face whatever comes next." Galaxy had seen a human rise as an unexpected champion, a warrior who stood with a wounded alien princess to challenge an empire. Their story was one of courage, hope, and the unbreakable power of alliance. And as the stars shone brightly above, a new dawn awaited for Vera, for Earth, and for all those who dared to fight for freedom.